All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is Hassan Mohsin. I'm the program manager for Microsoft Reactor in Abu Dhabi. Microsoft Reactors are hubs for founders and developers to meet, learn, and connect to local peers. And today we're having a session about JavaScript, and we're joined by Dana, who has over 25 years of experience as a technical trainer across multiple languages, including C#, Xamarin, ASEE, WebForms, and Objective-C, so much more. We're so excited to have you here with us to take us through this journey. We'll be covering so much about the web development fundamentals using JavaScript across the syntax, functionalities, using frameworks and libraries. We're so happy to have you with us and excited for this journey.
Thank you. Are we ready to start? Do you want to tell them about the repos, or shall I?
All good. I'll be sharing some learning resources on the Q&A tab, by the way, for everyone who's with us on the stream today. So you can access this and follow along as we will be presenting some of this information from the repo. So you can just download and follow along. I'll be dropping these links just right now.
Okay. I see we already have a question. Somebody wants to know, can I know where the link is for a previous session like HTML and CSS? So I'll tell you right now, it's actually not out there on my GitHub, but if you'll wait just a little bit of time after the seminar is over, I'll re-push it back out there. I actually took it down last week. So I think it's been shared with you here. But let me go ahead and pull over a screen. I think I'm sharing my desktop with you. And you'll notice right here at the top that if you go to github.com/learnwithdana, that's me, you should see, I don't have very many public repos. I only turn them on when we're doing classes. So I'll turn one on for the HTML reactor that I did last week for those of you that are interested in finding that. If you go out and pull this down, you will find the PDF that I'm using for presentation. You'll also find some starters for some demos we're going to do. And you'll also find the solutions if for some reason we get slowed down and I don't get to do all of them, you'll still have a couple of examples out there. So let's talk a little bit about JavaScript. So
Dana, just a quick one. Can you restart sharing the screen? And I will also share with the person who asked about the HTML and CSS the YouTube link to the channel. So these sessions are recorded, so you will find a reference there as well.
All right. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. So what you should see on my screen as I pull this over is you do see the PDF now? I love technical issues. Okay, there we go. All right, so I am assuming that you know a little bit about programming. This isn't what is a programming language, but it is a description of how to use JavaScript, how to get started building websites with JavaScript. And so we do assume you know a little bit of HTML before you get here. So we have about an hour, and let's see how much of this we can get done. So first of all, I'm going to have a PDF here in front of me. I am going to do some live coding, but I use this PDF to make sure that I don't get sidetracked on my conversation. It also has some little snippets of code that we can look at before we go do some live coding with them. So JavaScript is a language that is extremely popular, and it supports all kinds of different programming. Really what we're going to be talking about mostly here today is client-side scripting, and that is JavaScript that runs in the browser to give web pages dynamic behavior. In other words, to make web pages do something. There is also JavaScript that runs on the server. And this is JavaScript that might interact with databases, process data submitted by a web page, and typically it's done through something called Node.js. So if you want to know more about that, you can do a quick Bing search on Node.js. JavaScript can also be used to build mobile applications, in other words, Android and iOS applications using JavaScript. Now you have to use a framework to make that work because that JavaScript is not the natural language on those devices, but you can certainly use a couple of different frameworks for that. Now, if you're a programmer in another language like, say, C# or like Java, those languages are compiled languages. What a compiled language is a language that a program called a compiler translates the text you type into something that can be run inside of the computer called machine code. And then usually, like in a Windows machine, you end up with an exe, right? And then you double click on the exe and it runs. JavaScript is not compiled. JavaScript is interpreted. It means that it is processed in its raw text form. Now, when JavaScript is running in a browser, which is mostly what we're going to be talking about, it can do all kinds of things. It can do math if you need a little calculator. It can hide and show form fields. It can make sure that the data entered in a form is valid before it is sent back to a server for processing. It can fetch data from a server. So for instance, those of you who watched either Premier League's soccer this weekend, which we did, but we also watched the American football Super Bowl. If you're on a website like ESPN, a lot of times in the top right corner, those websites will show the score as it changes. In other words, a live score, except you didn't touch any button to make that happen. You didn't hit refresh on the browser. So there's a technology called Ajax that allows you to fetch data from a server asynchronously. And you can dynamically create the page. You can fetch data from a server. It comes back with 70 rows, and you can create a table dynamically with 70 rows where the table wasn't there when you started. We'll see how some of this works. Now, if we go to the next page, it says JavaScript that's running in a browser may not. So these are things that you can't do from inside of a web page. You can't interact with the camera or the mic without involving some permissions that the user has to grant. You can't read and write files on the hard drive with just a very few exceptions involving cookies and persistent web storage. And you can't interact with the operating system. Sometimes we use the term sandboxed. Web applications run in a sandbox. It keeps malicious JavaScript from messing around with your machine. Now, when JavaScript is running in a server, it can read files, it can interact with databases because it's actually running on the server, so it's very, very powerful. Now, you'll sometimes hear when people talk about JavaScript, you'll hear people talk about what flavor or what version of JavaScript. In fact, you'll even hear people talk about ECMAScript. So there's some things you need to know. First of all, ECMAScript is the name of the standard, the rules for what a JavaScript language looks like. ECMAScript is the official formal name of the standard. And JavaScript is just a dialect of ECMAScript. JavaScript is the language we code in. And that standard has evolved over the years. You'll notice that way back in 1997, there was something we used to call ES1 or ECMAScript 1. And the numbers were ES1, ES2, ES3, ES4, ES5, and ES6 up until 2015. But then they switched things over and they started using the year at the end of the word ECMAScript. So ECMAScript 2015 is co-known as ES6 in 2015, all the way up to ECMAScript 2020. Now, the reason that these numbers are so important to you guys is that when you research things on the web and you see features that JavaScript has, you have to remember that the browsers that your users are using may not support those features yet. For example, most modern browsers support either ES5 or ES6. So notice it takes a while from the time that the language or the standard adopts some features to when they become commonplace in modern browsers. So be careful when you're using JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is executed by a JavaScript engine, and the engine is embedded in a browser, what we're going to do today, but it also can be embedded in something called a Node.js engine. That's for the server. Now, the real trick of this is there are many different JavaScript engines. V8 is the most popular. It's used by Chrome, Node.js, and the newest version of Edge. But other browsers use Chakra or SpiderMonkey or JavaScript code. And what this really means is that the versions of JavaScript might be just a little bit different. Something that works in one browser one way might not work in another browser exactly the same way. This cross-browser conformity is a real problem, even in the year 2020. So it's something to be aware if you're frustrated that something worked in Chrome, but it didn't work in IE9. And again, it's just because the different JavaScript engines that are out there. Now, there is a website, it's mentioned down here at the bottom, caniuse.com. I'm not going to go there, but it's a great website to put on your browser, put it on your favorites. And as you become a web programmer, if you want to know, can I use this new feature I found on the web? You go to Can I Use, you put the feature at the top, and it will come back and it will show you all the browsers that support that feature. If your users are not using one of those browsers, then it's not a feature you want to use. So let's actually get into the language JavaScript now. Now, we will be doing some live coding in a few minutes, but I like to build up a little bit of skill so you can see some rules here. So a JavaScript script, or what some people call a program, contains one or more lines of JavaScript code, and each statement is typically written on a separate line and typically ends with a semicolon. But the semicolon is not required. So this means that when you look at different people's scripts, some people will have semicolons and some people won't. The only time the semicolon is technically needed is when there are two or more lines on a single statement. If you look at the example down at the bottom, it says JavaScript ignores white space. Now, just because it ignores white space doesn't mean that we should go willy-nilly. We have some good standards here. So var name equal Natalie. Do you see this is going to build a variable called name and assign it Natalie? There's a lot of extra spaces around the equal, but it doesn't care. On the next one, var age equal 36. Do you see there's a variable called age? The person is 36. There's no spaces on either side of the equal, and it doesn't care. And on the last line, do you see it says var message? So there's a variable called message, and they're concatenating various values together. They're taking the word name colon and concatenating with the value of name, Natalie, and then concatenating it with a space age colon, and then concatenating it with the value of 8. And notice that that statement spanned 2 lines, and JavaScript doesn't care. Now, if you're a programmer in another language, one of the biggest things that you're going to struggle with is that JavaScript variables are untyped. So when you declare the variable, you don't say it's a string or it's an integer or it's a double like you do in many of the other languages that are out there. So if you look down here at this example that says var first name, first of all, variables are case sensitive. They're made up of letters, numbers, and the character $ and undersign. Most people use what we call camel case, which means the first letter of every word is capitalized, except the first word. I guess in my brain, a camel has a hump in the middle. That's where that term comes from. So do you see first name, last name, name of university? Do you see the capitalization there? You can also declare multiple variables on a line. Do you see city of birth and current age are both declared there? JavaScript has several different primitive types. I think the newest version of JavaScript says there are about 9 different primitive types. But notice that the primitive types that we're going to really look at today are numbers, strings, booleans, and objects. So numbers, I think, are intuitively obvious. Strings, I think, are intuitively obvious. Booleans are the word true and false. And an object is a conglomerate of data, several different fields packaged together into one piece. Now, JavaScript. This should say JavaScript. I don't know why it says Java. Sorry about that little typo there. However, JavaScript is loosely typed. So watch this. This is why types are not used. Var x. X is a variable. You can assign x a 10, and on the very next line of code, assign it the word 10. On the very next line of code, assign it the Boolean true. So each time you change the value, do you see the variable adapts to the new value? And variables that don't have any value ever assigned to it have a value that is called undefined. Now, one really weird thing about variables that are defined using the keyword var is the JavaScript engine Hoisting. This is really weird. This took me a long time to get used to in JavaScript. So you don't have to put the variable declaration at the top. I didn't say you shouldn't. Just said you don't have to. So on this script in the middle where it says x equal 10, do you see we haven't declared x, but if you go down about 4 lines, there's the var x. It's like, why did they put it there? But it doesn't complain. X equals 10, it's 10, x equal x plus 1, now it's 11, and when you do a console.log, it's going to display 11, even though the variable wasn't declared to the bottom. The JavaScript engine runs through and finds all the variables and pulls them or hoists them to the top if they're defined with the word var. Now down below there, one really weird thing happens though. The variable declarations are hoisted to the top, but not the initializations. That means that really weird things happen. If you look at the bottom example, do you see it says x equal x plus 1, and your brain, it says x, where's x? And you move your eyes down and you see var x equal 10. Well, here's what the JavaScript engine did. It hoisted the var x, but it didn't hoist the equal 10. So when it hoisted the var x, x is undefined. So now when you say x equals x plus 1, undefined and plus 1 in JavaScript is called not a number. So when you go to do a console.log, it's going to display not a number, in nan actually, rather than the number 11. So what's really weird is that although the variable declaration was hoisted, the initialization wasn't. And what I'm really leading up to, guys, is that var is a bad way to declare variables. The problem is that we've done it that way for about 20 years. So when you do a lot of internet searches, you're going to find lots of examples that use the word var. But if we'll go ahead and go over to the next page, 2 or 3 more things about var, and then I'm going to tell you another way to do it. But the reason I'm telling you about them now again is you're going to find them all over the internet when you do searches. So technically, JavaScript doesn't even require you to use the var. It just implicitly defines it if you don't explicitly declare it. Name equal Natalie, no var, no problem. It just creates a variable on the fly called name, and it assigns it Natalie, same thing with age. But the problem with this, you might go, oh, that sounds cool, Dana, I don't have to declare my variables anymore. But the problem with this is if you make a typo, it just creates a new variable. So do you see where it says var number equal 10? Clearly, we thought the variable was called number. But now when we say numbers equal 12, because of this no error issue, do you see it just declared a variable called numbers on the fly, put a 12 in it? So when you do a console.log number and you think the number 12 is going to come out, it's really going to print 10, and you're going to spend forever going, why isn't it a 12? Why isn't it a 12? Until your brain sees the S on the end of numbers and says, oh, I misspelled the variable. Now you can make that part not happen by using something called useStrict. So in the bottom example, if you put quote useStrict close quote at the top of a JavaScript routine, the JavaScript engine will say, you better declare variables or I'm going to declare an error. So on that line of code where it says var number equal 10, do you see we've got a variable called number that's 10? And in the next line of code, when we misspell our variable numbers, the JavaScript engine goes, stop, there's a problem. I would much rather have a problem and let it give me an error than spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes trying to find a misspelled variable. Now,
I just want to quickly jump in and request that you just maximize the PDF. Some members might have like a streaming issue or something, and
so that's about as maximum as it can be.
Maximum, yeah, and zoom in into the content. And for everyone watching us, actually, you can adjust the playback settings and like quality by there is a small icon on the bottom right side of your screen. So you click on that and then you select the highest quality, and then that would fix any issue. But that's about it. I'll just wanted to make this quick note because I
no problem. Let me know if something is not showing right.
No, it's all good now. Thank you.
Okay. So ES6 introduced 2 new keywords called let and const, and we try to use the let instead of the var in the modern world. These variables are not hoisted. They work like variables in other languages. They are block scope, so if you declare them inside of curly braces, they are only known inside the curly braces. This actually is an error in this example, because do you see that they have a function called add numbers, and inside the true part of an if, they declare the variable sum, but that variable is only known inside the true part of the if. So that's not the way a var variable would work. A var variable would belong to the function. So we like let variables. We're going to use let variables throughout everything. We got just one small problem with let variables. Older versions of IE don't support it. So if you do have to support older versions of IE, then you may have issues with let. You may still have to use var. But if you're using Edge, if your users are using Edge, we're in good shape here. Const variables are variables that cannot change. All right, so let's get ready to look at just a couple of more things, and then we're going to go code for a few minutes. So JavaScript supports all the operators. If you were a programmer, you would expect it to support plus, minus, times, and divide, so you can build mathematical formulas like you can in pretty much every programming language. You can perform mathematical operations on strings. So if you use a plus on strings, it's going to concatenate them. If you concatenate the string 1, 2, 3 and the string 4, 5, 6, you're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But if you do have input from the user and you want to be able to process it, then there are functions in JavaScript that convert strings that contain numbers to numeric values that you can do math with. And the only one I'm going to look at is called number. It's the easiest one that's out there. It's less forgiving of bad data, but it is probably the one that you would want to use, and it's the only one we're going to talk about because we have such a short amount of time. Now, as I come down through here, I want to just look at some syntax. If you have a background in a language that is what we call C-based, so what are the C-based languages? C, C++, C#, Java, and there are more. TypeScript. These languages all use the same type of if, while, and for. If you haven't seen them before, we will use them here, but let's just look very briefly. It's the keyword if right here, followed by parentheses and a condition. Double equal is equality. Exclamation point equal is not equal. You'll see up at the top there are other relational operators as well. And then do you see the true part of the if has curly braces around it, followed by an else? And the false portion of the if has curly braces around it. So that's the syntax of an if. If we look down at an if that has a two-part question to it, maybe there's a variable called city and there's a state called, or there's a variable called state. You might want to know, is the city Marietta and the state Georgia? It turns out where I live, there's a Marietta, Texas, a Marietta, Oklahoma, a Marietta, Georgia. So do you see that you might want to compare, is the city Marietta, and the double and signs is the word and, means both have to be true. A for loop, we'll look at an example here in just a few minutes, but if you look at the for loop and have a background in a C-based language, it looks exactly like a for loop in a C-based language. The first part of the for loop is the initialization. This sets the counter to 0. The second part of the for loop says keep looping as long as this is true. Kids is an array on the line of code before, and kids.length is how many kids there are. And then I++ is a fancy way of adding 1 to I. So the first time through this loop, I will be 0 and it will print out kids sub 0. That means index 0. And the first element in an array in this language is 0. So do you see when I is a 0, it will print out Natalie. Then I will become 1, it will print out Brittany. When I is 2, it will print out Zachary. JavaScript also supports a while loop, but it's pretty rarely used, so I won't spend much time looking at it. It's basically a while with a condition, and that condition is in parentheses. As long as the while is true, this language keeps executing. All right, let's look at functions, and then we're going to go code. So JavaScript uses the keyword function, like you see here, followed by the name of a function, display name and age, followed by a parameter list. Parameters are inputs to the function, values that you pass in. And they don't have a type because, again, JavaScript is untyped. This just says we're going to pass 2 values in. We're going to assume the first one, we'll call it name. We'll assume the second one, we'll call it age. Do you see all they're really doing right here is concatenating those 2 values together with the word is in between, dumping it out into a console window. We'll see where that shows up in a minute. And then down here, this is where we're calling the function. Do you see there's a variable called my name, which is Ezra. There's a variable called my age, which is 16. And then do you see when we call display name and age, do you see that's what's actually going to call the function? That's what's going to call the function. And then the value of my name is going to be passed into name, and the value of my age is going to be passed into age. So do you see it's going to end up printing Ezra is 16. So functions are a way of grouping together behavior into a single unit that can then be used over and over. And when we get around to web programming in just a few minutes, they are going to be also used to handle things like when a button is clicked, run this code. When a text box loses focus, run this code. Functions can also return values in this language. And you return a value by just using the return statement and the value you want to return. For those of you, again, that know C, C++, Java, C#, notice the function doesn't actually advertise that it returns the value. It's just the return statement is what returns it. So here do you see two numbers are passed in. We add the two numbers together and we return their sum. So down here, do you see that I have a variable called A and B and C? A contains a 10, B contains a 20. So when I call the add function, do you see A, which is 10, is passed into num1, B, which is 20, is passed into num2. Do you see they're added together, which returns a 30? Do you see the add function returns a 30? Do you see C ends up becoming 30? All right, so let's play around for a few minutes with JavaScript. So in order to do this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go off and I'm going to bring up a Visual Studio Code, which I've already launched. Visual Studio Code can be downloaded from Microsoft's website. It is a wonderful IDE for doing JavaScript and HTML work, as well as other tools like Angular and React even. So I have a folder that we're going to open, and that's going to be treated as a project. If I choose Open Folder, and I'm going to have to come out here to my GitHub folder. Here is, I called it Basic Language, and this is the folder that is going to hold my data, my code. Now, I can build JavaScript code without actually building a web page using an extension. Visual Studio Code supports extensions. If you look over here at this, what is it, 4 rectangles with one of them separating from the others. This is the extension manager, and I'm going to install an extension called CodeRunner. CodeRunner is an extension that allows you to basically test little JavaScript routines while you're trying to learn the language. So to install it, all you do is you click Install. Notice it finished installing right here. I'll close this window. I'm going to come back up here to this top icon right here. This is the folder where I'm going to keep my code. I'm going to right click on basic language. Excuse me. I am going to click right here, new file, and I'm just going to name it test1.js. So do you see this is going to be our first script, and we're just going to write a little bit of code here just to make sure we understand it before we go off and build a web page or two. So I'm going to put the use strict right here, and I like the semicolon, so I try to put the semicolons at the end. And then let's just build a couple of variables. We'll build a variable here called name, and we'll go ahead and assign my name to it. And we'll build a variable called age, and I'm going to completely lie and tell you that I'm 21. So now I've got 2 variables, and I want to show you the console.log statement. And when you're trying to learn JavaScript, it is such a great tool to come into Visual Studio Code, install the CodeRunner extension, and then just sit down here and play with little pieces of code to see if you can make things work. We're going to put the word name, we're going to concatenate the word is, and then we're going to concatenate age. Now, CodeRunner requires the script be saved. So I'm going to come over here to the file window, and I'm going to choose the save button. And now do you see this code is saved? Now here's the fun part about CodeRunner. If you look over here in the top right corner, there's a triangle that's fallen over on its side. I call it the play button. And you can click the play button, and do you see the window splits? And do you see it actually runs your script? There's the Dana is 21. So when you're sitting down trying to learn JavaScript, this is such a great tool. Let's come in and change this so that we have a function. Display data. We'll pass in name and age. We'll put an open curly here. We'll move our console on the inside of it. And now we're going to call our function. Display data. We'll pass it name and age. Now I noticed that the parameters and the arguments have the same name. These are the parameters. They're kind of like a toaster. It's where the values drop in. I had toast this morning. This is what made me think of it. Name and age are dropped in. This is the source of the values coming in from right here. And so I'm going to save everything. And then do you see when I hit the play button? Now, when I hit the play button, it's not going to erase what you see at the bottom. Do you see it's just going to show it again? You can come over here and there is, I believe, a clear button, although it's been a long time. There it is, clear output. So you can clear the output and hit play again if you don't want to see your last run. Now, we're not going to spend much time here coding this way. But again, if you're trying to learn JavaScript and you're not a programmer, or you're trying to learn JavaScript and you just have some code you want to just test out, again, come to Visual Studio Code, download the Code Runner extension, and now you can write simple scripts and use the console.log statement to output whatever's going on. All right, now let's run back over to the PDF for just a minute so we can write with some web pages. So if I want to use JavaScript in the browser, then I have to include the JavaScript in a web page using a script tag. Now there's two different ways to do that. The worst way and the better way. I'm going to show you the worst way first. Do you see right here I have a web page. Here's the HTML tag. Here's the head tag and the body tag. In the body tag, do you see there's a div, which is just a placeholder, whose ID is message div. And I want to put the word hello world programmatically in that div. So do you see here I have a script? And do you see that the script will actually run when the browser encounters the code? So after it puts the div in the browser's DOM, in the document object model, do you see it will run the script, and do you see it goes off and it calls document get element by ID message div. So document.get element by ID, I think it's got a pretty obvious name, doesn't it? It finds the guy whose ID is message div, puts it into a variable, and then it turns around to that variable and it sets its inner HTML. So its inner HTML is basically what goes between those two greater than less than tags. And do you see that we're programmatically putting hello world there? But we don't like to actually embed our script, our JavaScript, in the page itself. What we prefer to do is to put it into an actual JS file and then include that JS file into the page. So in this example, do you see that I am going to use a script tag, and I'm now putting it in the head tag. It's going to go out into my website into a folder called scripts and basically fetch the file greetings.js. I'll show you what it looks like in just a minute. Do you see here's the same div, and do you see that this is a script tag that's going to call show greeting? Show greeting is now a function, but it has exactly the same code in it we did. Now I'm going to get rid of even this script tag here in just a moment. So basically, script tags bring the script in, and then once the script is there, we can interact with the code. Now, there are many different ways to access elements on a page. The most efficient way is to give your guys IDs, and then you can programmatically find it. Do you see here's an HTML document that's got a div with an ID, it's got an input field with an ID, it's got another input field with an ID, and it's got a button with an ID. So if you look in the JavaScript, do you see I can programmatically fetch each one of these? Now these variable names right here that I'm highlighting, these are the variables that are JavaScript variables that interact with, and these quoted values, these are the IDs of the values that you interact with. Now there are many other ways to get elements on a page. We can't really talk about them in a 1-hour seminar. But there's a function called get elements by class name. So if you know about CSS classes and you know that you can put a class equal, you can find elements that have a particular class name. You can get elements by tag name. So for instance, you can get all paragraphs or all divs or all image elements. Query selector uses a CSS selector. So If you know what CSS selectors look like in CSS files, pound sign and an ID would be how you'd find an element by ID. Query selector all, you could use something there, but we're going to, in this seminar, we're going to focus on get element by ID. It's the most common thing you use, and it is the most efficient thing you can use. Once you find an element, you can change what's in it. So when you want to work with paragraphs, spans, divs, things that you put HTML between the starting and ending tags, we use a property called inner HTML. And because JavaScript is case sensitive, the word inner has to all be small letters and HTML has to be all caps. If you capitalize it any other way, it's going to be invalid. So do you see in this example, we have a paragraph with an ID of order status. And if you look at the JavaScript that we're going to run in just a minute, there's an order number and an order status with some data. We're going to build a message that can concatenate things together. It's going to say order 10254 status is processing. And then do you see we're going to find the paragraph whose ID is order status. And then the last thing we do is we set the inner HTML to that message. All right, one more thing. And then we're going to, actually two more things. Then we're going to go off and code again. So that was working with paragraphs, divs, but users don't type in paragraphs or divs. Users type in input boxes. Users check radio buttons. Users select from drop-downs. Users click buttons. So when you want to work with input elements, then you work with something just a little bit different. Instead of using the inner HTML property, you use the value property to get whatever they've typed in. So if you had an input field whose type was text, whose ID was name, and an input field whose type was text, whose value was age, if you wanted to get whatever the user typed in those values, do you see it's still a matter of reaching back and finding the field first? So now we found both the name field and the age field. And then to get the actual name, we reach in the name field, which is this guy right up here, and get the value. That's whatever the user has typed in that text. We're doing a ditto with the age. Then we're just generating a message and again displaying it in this paragraph at the bottom. But when does this JavaScript run? That's the trick. When does this JavaScript run? Well, here it happens. By the way, you can put a value in an input box exactly the same way. So when does this code run? This code runs when events happen. An event is something that happens on the page that a browser can go, or JavaScript can go, I'd like to know when that happens. I'd like to know when the web page finishes loading. I've got some data I want to initialize. I'd like to know when the users clicked a button. I need to make something run. I'd like to know when a field gets focused or a field loses focus because I have some code I want to run. So in JavaScript, what we do is we write event handlers. An event handler says, when that event happens, run this code. When the user clicks that button, run this code. When the web page finishes loading, run this code. When this field gets focus, run this code. And you assign these event handlers by using some properties. We're going to see an onload and an onClick and an onFocus today. So those are the names of the properties we're going to use to find out when the web page finishes loading, when a user clicks a button, when a field gets focus. So the way we write these event handlers, excuse me while I am maximized, I need to pull down. A bad way to assign event handler is just assign it in the HTML. If you see anybody writing code like this, right in the middle of an HTML element, walk away, walk away. That is not how we do it. You'll see people demonstrate it on the internet, but that is not the way you want to do it. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to assign event handlers programmatically when the page finishes loading. So the browser is going to finish loading the page, and then you're going to say, oh, wait, Mr. Browser, just one more minute. I'd like you to know that when the user clicks that button, I want to call that function. So let's look at this example. window.onload, right here. Window.onload is the event that happens when the page finishes loading. And init is the name of a function. Now, the first thing that this is kind of weird is that you don't put parentheses after the name of the function. You say, when this happens, run this function. Weird. So now we're going to go out and we're going to say, well, we want something to happen when the user clicks the button. So go find the button, and when the user clicks the button, come back out here and run this function. So here we go, because I know you're quite confused right now. We need to demonstrate this. So I'm going to open another folder that I have called Hello in a Browser. And I've got us ready so that we can code pretty quickly here. I've already created the page. Let's look at the page real quick. Basically, this page has a style sheet that controls certain behavior, and this is where I'm going to include a script in just a minute. Do you see it has a really pretty image of hot air balloons across the top of the page? It's got a mediumly large header that says the first demo. It has a paragraph that says everybody learns a programming language by first writing the Hello World program. This is ours. And then here is an HTML form. Now in this HTML form, do you see that there is a input box called name field? And there's a label right in front of it that puts name : in front of this field. So this is where the user is going to type their name. And then do you see that there is a button right below it? The text on the button is click me, but do you see that the ID is greet user button? Now I don't have any JavaScript yet. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you one more extension we're going to use. When we want to test web pages and we want to run them from inside of Visual Studio, we're going to use an extension called Live Server. Live Server will build us a little web server that allows us to basically host our applications from inside of Visual Studio Code and never have to go out to Apache or IIS or whoever you're hosting your web server in. Now you'll notice it's finished installing at this point. If I go back to my go back to my code, I can right click on a page and I can choose Open with Live Server. And it will take a few seconds to come up. And then over here on my other browser, I'm going to bring it across. Do you see that this is our page? 127.0.0.1 is the local machine. Localhost, Live Server listens on port 5500. So all of your URLs will look like this, followed by the name of the page that you clicked on. Here's our balloon image. Here's our first demo heading 2. Here's our paragraph. Here's our label. Here's our input box. And here is our button. Now, I'm going to minimize this for a minute, and I'm going to come back, and what we're going to do is we're going to trap the click event on this button, and in that click event, we are going to find the name that's been entered in this input box, and then alert it in a little pop-up box. So again, if I were to bring back up this page, I'm going to type Dana here, and when I click on Click Me, it will come up and it will say, Hello, Dana. So the first thing I've got to do is create a script, right? So I come over here to Scripts, and I'm going to click a new file under Scripts, and I'm going to name it the same as my page. This is a pretty common thing. If my page is index.html, then my script would be index.js. So then I'm going to go to my HTML, and I'm going to include this script. So I include it with a script tag, and I use src to indicate the name of the source file. Now look at Visual Studio Code. Do you see it is aware of the folders that are out there? So when I pick the scripts folder, do you see it's aware of my index.js file? Oops, that was not a good thing. Index.js. And then when I close the script tag, in script tags have to have a separate closing tag. That's just link tags don't, a lot of tags don't, but a script tag has to have a separate closing tag. So now I'm including the script. So when this page loads in the browser, this script will come in too. Unfortunately, there's nothing in the script file. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say use strict, because I don't like misspelled variables to cause me to think too hard. And now the next thing I need to do is I need to hook up the click event handler to the button. I need to say, when they click the button, run this code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out here and I'm going to say window.onload. So this is going to run when the user, types the URL of the page and the page comes up. Once the browser is finished parsing the HTML, then this event fires. Now, I know I showed you one way to do the load event, but it's much more common to use another technique. This one took me a while to get used to. It's called an anonymous function. Bear with me here. An anonymous function means that after the onload, we just define the function right there. We don't give it a name. We just define the body of the function right there. And this keeps you from having to put the name of the function where I have the blue and then writing the function separately. So let's go off and see if we can do that. When the window loads, I want you to run this code. So this is the code that runs when the window loads. Now let's look back over at the HTML. Do you see I've got to find this button? I'm going to double click on it and copy it to my clipboard so I don't misspell it. And I'm going to come back out here and I'm going to build a JavaScript variable that has the same name as my HTML object. I think this always makes me not lose my brain and remember two names for the same thing. Get element by ID, and do you see I'm going to use the same name for both. Now let me remind you again, this is the ID in HTML. This is the JavaScript variable. When they're the same, life is just, you don't have to think. It's wonderful. So now I want to go to that button. And I want to say when somebody clicks you, I want you to run this function. Now I'm going to use the name function for this. On user button. You can name it anything you want to, but I usually start mine with the word on, followed by the name of the HTML element, followed by the name of the event. This is a pretty common naming technique. So then I'm going to come down here to this function, and I'm going to have to write this function I just promised right now. And inside of here, what is it we said we wanted to do? Well, we said we wanted to get the name that the user typed in this field, put the word hello in front of it, and pop it up in a little pop-up box. So I'm going to grab the ID, because that again is how I find a field. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, let that variable equal document.getElementById. You find out you're going to be calling this thing a lot. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the name out of it. So remember, I use value. Oops, not node value. Sometimes the little autocomplete suggests things that aren't right. So now do you see that I've pulled the name out of the input field? So now I'm going to build a message. And I'm from Texas, so we'll use the word howdy, not hello. And then I'll put name, like the old West movies you see. And then I'm just going to use an alert to pop it up. You'll see what an alert is in a minute. It's pretty ugly, probably not something you use in a production program, but it's a great way when you're first learning. Now let's review what we've done again before we go off and run it. We have a page that we've included a script on. And in this script, we have said, this is the code I want to run when the window first loads. And this is the code that's going to connect up the button, greet user PTN, with the event handler that is going to run when they click it. Inside that event handler, I'm going to find the input field, grab what's in it, generate a message, and then pop it up in an alert. I need to go off here and I'm going to do a save all because I made changes across it. 2 files, and then I'm going to open and run with live server. Now, let's see if it really works. Same program as before. Do you see I'm going to type in Dana here? I'm going to hit the click me button. Oh, it didn't work. I wonder why. Well, I don't really know why, but I was hoping something like this would happen because I'd like to show you how to debug. This might be the most important thing a novice can do, because if you don't know this, you just click this all the time and go, gosh, why didn't that work? So if you come up here to the 3 dots in Edge or any of the browsers that you're using, you can go into more tools, and there'll be something called developer tools. And developer tools splits a window and allows you to go out and see the data. If you go to the console tab, do you see it tells me that on line number 3, over here on the far right-hand side, index.js line number 3, it found an open curly that it wasn't expecting. So line number 3, it found an open curly. Line number 3. F-U-N, this is not how you spell function. F-U-N-C-T-I-O-N. So do you see that this took me directly to the spot? I'm going to go ahead and save this. Control S will save it. And then I'm going to come back over here and just refresh my browser. I'm going to type in Dana and hit click me. There's our alert. Not the prettiest thing in the world. That's why most people don't actually use alerts, but they are great when you're first learning to program. So I hope that you enjoyed this little search right here over in the debugging world. I do want to show you one more thing as long as we're debugging. You can click on sources. We were on console where the errors were, but you can click on sources and you can come down to scripts and you can actually see the script that was loaded in the browser. So this is the script. And in fact, you can put something called a breakpoint on it. So the way you put a breakpoint is you click on the line number. And what a breakpoint does is it says when the browser tries to run that line of code, pause. And when you pause, then you can kind of see what's going on. So let's reload this page. Let's type in Dana and hit click me. And do you see that it paused and it's executing this line of code? Here are the current value of the variables. And I can use these little icons right here to move from line to line. This is called the step over icon. When I click on it, you'll notice I go from line 9 to line 10. When I click on it again, I go from line 10 to line 12. When I click on it again, I go from line 12 to 13. And when I'm ready just to go ahead and run the script, do you see I can hit the play button? By the way, do you see the value of all the variables as we were going through there? So it's running. To take a breakpoint off, you just toggle it. You just click on the line number again. Do you see clicking and unclicking? Do you see just toggles the breakpoint? Well, let's finish up this course by going and looking at a couple of more things we can do real quickly. And then we will, we can go off and run my second program right now. So I'm going to open up a different folder. And this is an Adopt a Pet folder. So this Adopt a Pet folder is interesting because it's got a couple of extra things. If I look right here, this is the index.html file. It's got an image of a cute corgi. We have 2 images that are out there, corgis and kittens. This is an Adopt a Pet, so you'll be able to see the corgi when it comes up, but there are 2 radio buttons right below there. Do you see one radio button shows puppies, which is the one that is currently checked? And the other radio button is going to show a kitten when they check it. So what this means is we have to change the image each time they click the radio button. When they click the kitten radio button, we're going to show the kitten image. When they click the puppy radio button, they're going to show the puppy. So let's go back off, and I believe that I've already started this. So I have the script file already built, and I have some functions kind of set in. You see, this is the window load. This is the code that's going to run when they click the puppy. This is the code that's going to run when they click the kitten. But I do need to include this script. I need to make sure that it's included right here. So I wanted to go ahead and do this again to make sure that you knew how to go off and do this. We're going to pick the folder that it's in and the file that it's in. And do you see this will then include this script when the page loads. Now what I need to do is I need to write event handlers on these buttons. But what I'd like to do for just a moment is I'd like you to see what the page looks like. Now remember, the page isn't going to work right now. So there's the cute puppy. And when I click on this kitten, I want it to change. I want it to change back. But do you see there's no behavior on that right now? So that's the first thing I want to do. I want to add some behavior so that these things switch. So we'll come back to Visual Studio Code. We've got to grab the IDs. So do you see puppy RDO is the ID of the puppy radio button, and kitten RDO is the ID of the kitten radio button. So the first thing we're going to have to do inside of here is we're just going to have to go off and find the puppy radio button. Puppy, let's see if I can type. Puppy, now you know why I copy and paste. Equal document dot get element by ID PYRDO. And so what I want to do is I want to go off and I want to say puppy radio dot on click. So when they click the radio button, I'm going to want to run this function. I'm just going to copy and paste here and then do the same thing for the kitten, except that this will be kitten radio, and kitten radio. I lost my much copy and paste. All right. So I have just wired in 2 event handlers. When they click either one of the radio buttons, these 2 functions will call. So let's go back and look at the page and find this image. This image has to have an ID for me to talk to it, or the best way to deal with it is to have that ID. So do you see the first thing I'm going to have to do is find that image, and then do you see I'm going to have to programmatically change the source and programmatically change the alt. So what I'll do right here is I'll say let image animal image equal document dot. You get the feeling that you're going to be calling get element by ID 1,000 times a week when you are a JavaScript programmer. And we're going to turn around and we're going to set the source of this guy equal to images / and now let's go look and make sure corgi.png over here on the left hand side. Corgi, C-O-R-G-I .png. So do you see that you can programmatically change HTML tags using JavaScript? We'll want to do the same thing to change the alt text. We'll just call it a cute puppy. And we'll also want to do pretty much the exact same thing down here, except would you agree that it's going to show the kitten, K-I-T-T-E-N image, and it's going to say a cute kitten, and I know I can't spell cute right, but it should still work. So we're going to go ahead and save everything. We're going to come back out here and we're going to reload this page. So what our expected behavior is that when we click this kitten, do you see it's going to say, oh, there it is, a cute kitten. And our expected behavior is when we click back on puppy, do you see it clicks back? Look at this dynamic behavior we have. The images aren't quite the same size, so that's why it's jumping. I thought about going back and getting images that were the same size, but I knew you would understand. The last thing I want to do is I want to be able to enter how many animals I want and order them. Kind of a goofy little thing, but let's go off and make this happen. So the first thing I need to do is I need to come back in and I need to find out what the order button is called. Do you see it's called order BTN? And do you see the quantity field is called QTY field? So if I come down here and say, oops, come up here at the top and hook up the order button. Let me go copy that so that we don't have to wait for me to type. Order button equal to, you've got it now, don't you? Document.getElementById. And then do you see we're going to let order button dot on click equal on order button click, which I've already coded down here, at least got it started. So the only other thing I need to do is I need to get the quantity field so I can figure out how many we need. And so let quantity field equal document dot. Yes, yes, we call it over and over and over. Now I need to get the actual number. So QTY, remember that when you're doing a get element by ID, you're finding the field, not the value in the field. So to get the value in an input field, do you remember that I used the dot value property? So that will get the value converted to a number so I can do math on it. Just to have a little bit sense of humor right here, we'll just give them buy one, get one free. So do you see, or buy any, get one free. And then the only thing we have left to do is to put a message down here in this paragraph. Do you see this paragraph is status message area? And do you see that I can come through here and say let status message area equal document dot get element by ID, paste it in, build us a message, status message area dot, remember enter HTML if it's a paragraph, div, or span, or one of the other HTML structural elements like a section or main or something like that. And then and I'm going to concatenate quantity. We know it's one more because we're using humor. Animals will be there Saturday. So we're going to go ahead and put a semicolon at the end, save everything, go back out here and reload the page. So we'll buy 2 kittens. We'll hit the order button, and our 3 animals will be there Saturday. Now there's lots of other things that we can do with JavaScript, but we only have an hour today. There is one more little section in the PDF. We don't have time to cover it, but there is a demonstration of it. If you read it and then you go out to the solutions, you will find a really complicated, I knew we wouldn't have time to get there, but I thought it would be fun if there was even a small chance. Excuse me while I'm having a little trouble going out there to my PDF. There is a, okay, hang on. Here it is, over here. Sorry. Mere moments. So if we come out here and we go to my drive C, where you're going to see the GitHub series right here. This is a starter, this is a solution, and what this does is this particular project actually fetches data from a server using Ajax. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. So if I delete that and I right click and choose open with code right here, it basically shows you how to have a URL, create something called an XML HTTP request object, which is going to basically talk to a web server at this location. It's going to do what they call a GET, which means it's going to fetch data from a REST API. This is the function that runs when the data comes back. And in the web world, a status code of 200 means that you didn't fail. In other words, that it did return data. And it basically takes this data and programmatically loads it into a table. It's a fun little thing. I knew it would probably take us almost an hour just to cover this. But sometimes when you have some code, what's really fun is that this data was fetched from another server. And we grabbed it and we dynamically created the HTML. So there's so much left to learn about HTML. But if you look at this briefly, do you see it's basically walking through the rows that came back? It's creating a row, creating columns, putting the data in it. This is where we end up when we learn enough JavaScript. But to get that far takes you weeks and weeks and weeks of practice. I think we're almost out of time. So let's go back and if anybody has any questions in the questions, I see 11 questions. Let's see if let's see what I've got right now. What does name have a strike through? Ron, I don't know why it has a strike through. It's something that's been happening recently with Visual Studio Code. I believe it is because there is a name property already out there. So it's suggesting that I not use name. It's something that just recently started happening in Visual Studio Code. I ignore it. Dana, in the display name and age example, do you not need to convert my age to a string? No, it's very weird in JavaScript. Basically, what it will do is it will coerce when you're doing concatenation if one side of it is a string. Now, if both parts of the side were numbers, it would do the math. But if one part is a string and one part is a number with the plus operator, it will coerce them. Thank you, Mr. Anonymous, for finding my C in my mistake. I'm glad you liked this session. Out of curiosity, not related coding, why do you have any idea on why all the browsers are stopping support on JavaScript this year? Turn to HTML5, which is what? I'm not sure what this last question really means. As far as I know, JavaScript is not going away, although there is something called WebAssembly now, which does allow you to program other languages inside of a browser. But JavaScript is the native language of a browser. But there are some technologies out there because JavaScript is kind of a Wild West language. By that, I mean that you can't define types on variables. So I think you're in good shape. OK, I think we just ended.
Thank you so much, Dana. All right, that's all with the questions. I just want to quickly remind everyone to send us their feedback on the Reactor survey and use the event ID 12496 on this session. This will help us understand more about the type of content and topics that you would love to see at the Reactor. So please spend a minute, send us your feedback on this link. And you can find more learning opportunities on Meetup. We are doing all the sessions online, so you can join multiple reactors, let's say, and get all these learning opportunities from the comfort of your home or office, and connect with us on social, and you'll find all the content that we're doing across all the reactors globally on the YouTube channel. So the stuff that you are doing all is recorded and will be available soon on the channel. I hope you had a great session and have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Dana, again for being with us and taking us through this journey with JavaScript.
Thank you.